Henderson sat at his kitchen table at 7:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, the golden light of late autumn filtering through the window above the sink. The apartment was quiet. Emma was already asleep upstairs in her bedroom, her small casting a soft glow beneath her door. She'd had a good day. They'd gone to the park after, visited the library for new books, and made chocolate chip cookies together, with Emma insisting on doing the important parts by herself, flour somehow ending up everywhere but the mixing bowl. He smiled at the memory, wiping a stray bit of flour from his shirt sleeve. These were the moments that mattered. These were the moments he lived for. That's when he noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter, white and official-looking, placed conspicuously beside his mail. Didn't remember seeing it earlier. His name was typed on the front in formal lettering, James Henderson. No personal touch, no warmth, just the cold formality of legal documentation. His stomach dropped before he'd even opened it. He recognized the official seal immediately, the court clerk's office. His hands began to shake as he carefully opened the envelope, already knowing that nothing good came in official court documents. His first thought was about Emma. Had something happened? Was she okay? His mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, each one worse than the last. Then he began to read. Petition 4, Modification of Custody Agreement. The words blurred momentarily as vision swam. Jennifer, his ex-wife, the woman who had walked out of their lives 3 years ago, leaving him with an infant daughter and a heart shattered into irreparable pieces. The woman who had chosen a new life, a new man, a fresh start, everything except her own daughter. He forced himself to read through the legal jargon, forcing his brain to process every damning word. Jennifer was claiming that was an unfit father, that his work schedule, his necessary work schedule that paid for their apartment, food, and Emma's education, was evidence of negligence, that he couldn't provide proper, that his long hours at the construction company meant little Emma would be better off in her sole care. Sole care, the words echoed in his mind like a death knell. The petition included statements from character witnesses, friends of Jennifer's, he assumed, claiming that had never shown interest in fatherhood, that he was emotionally distant, that he'd complained about the demands of raising a child. None of it was true. Every accusation was a complete distortion of reality, weaponized for a courtroom. Sank into a chair, the document trembling in his hands. He felt bile rising in his throat. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away. March 15th at 9:00 a.m. in family court, Judge Williams presiding. His mind spiraled into darkness. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, some stranger in a black robe would decide his daughter's future based on Jennifer's carefully crafted lies and whatever narrative her expensive attorney had woven. Didn't have an expensive attorney. His brother had recommended someone decent but was living paycheck to paycheck. Every extra dollar going into Emma's savings account for her future. He looked at the clock on the microwave. 8:15 p.m. That meant it was early morning in California. He didn't hesitate. He called his brother David immediately. "It's happening," said, his voice hollow. "Jennifer filed for full custody." The conversation lasted 43 minutes. David, a lawyer himself, explained everything in brutal clarity. Jennifer had likely been waiting for the right moment, gathering documentation and witnesses. She probably had a new lawyer, possibly someone she was involved with romantically who had connections. The custody battle would be brutal, adversarial, and emotionally devastating. After hanging up, sat in the darkness of his kitchen for another 2 hours, not moving, not thinking clearly, just existing in a fog of dread and panic. Around midnight, he quietly climbed the stairs to Emma's bedroom. He opened her door carefully, trying not to disturb her. His 3-year-old daughter lay sprawled across her bed in an impossible position, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, her hair splayed across the pillow like golden silk. One small foot hung off the edge of the mattress. sat on the edge of her bed watching her sleep, memorizing every detail of her face. He thought about the morning he'd first held her in the hospital, remembering how impossibly small she'd been, how his entire hand could barely span her back. He remembered teaching her to say "Dada," watching her first smile, her first steps. He remembered every fever, every nightmare, every scraped knee that he'd tenderly cleaned and bandaged. He was the one who braided her hair each morning before school. He was the one who listened to her rambling 3-year-old philosophy about why clouds were soft and whether dinosaurs had feelings. He was the one she ran to when she was frightened or hurt or simply wanted comfort. And Jennifer believed she could just take that away. Felt hot tears streaming down his face. His hands clenched into fists, not from anger but from a desperate, primal need to hold onto something, anything that would keep this nightmare from becoming reality. The next morning called his attorney, Tom Richardson, and scheduled an emergency meeting for lunch. He spent the entire morning in a daze, going through the motions at work, reviewing blueprints, talking with contractors, pretending everything was normal when his entire world was collapsing. At 12:30 p.m., he sat in Tom's office, the custody petition spread across the desk between them. Tom was a solid, experienced lawyer in his 50s, with tired eyes that had seen countless custody battles. He reviewed the documents carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is going to be challenging," Tom finally said, removing his reading glasses. "Jennifer's attorney is thorough. They've built a case based on your work schedule, and they have witnesses willing to testify that you've expressed frustration about parenting responsibilities." "I never said that," protested. "I love my daughter more than anything in the world. I've never regretted being her father for a single moment." "I believe you," Tom said, his voice steady and professional. "But we have to prove it. We need documentation, testimonies from Emma's teachers, her doctor, people who've seen you with her. We need to show the judge that you're not just an adequate parent, you're an excellent one." As left the office 2 hours later, his head spinning with legal terminology and strategy, he felt something crystallize inside him. This wasn't just about custody arrangements or legal technicalities. This was about fighting for Emma's future, fighting for their relationship, fighting to ensure that his daughter wouldn't grow up confused about whether her father had wanted her, or worse, believing the lies Jennifer's attorney would undoubtedly try to plant in her mind. He had never fought for anything harder in his life. The next 3 weeks would determine everything. The courthouse was a monument to institutional coldness. Arrived at 8:15 a.m. on March 15th, 30 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin, his tie too tight around his neck despite adjusting it 4 times that morning. The building's marble corridors echoed with the footsteps of lawyers, clerks, and people whose lives were about to be dramatically altered by judicial decree. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a pale, sickly glow that made the beige walls look even more depressing. His attorney, Tom Richardson, met him on the 3rd floor outside the courtroom, already carrying his leather briefcase and wearing his most serious expression. "How are you holding up?" Tom asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I didn't sleep," admitted. "Haven't slept properly in 3 weeks." Tom nodded sympathetically. "That's normal. Just remember, stay calm, don't react emotionally, and let me do the talking. If the judge asks you a direct question, answer honestly and concisely. Don't elaborate or get defensive. Understood?" Nodded, though his stomach was twisting into knots, so tight he wondered if he'd ever be able to eat normally again. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, heavy wooden doors with brass handles that looked like they'd been there for 100 years. Through the small windows in the doors, could see Jennifer already seated at the opposing table, looking poised and composed in a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She didn't look like a woman fighting for custody of a daughter she'd abandoned. She looked like she was attending a business meeting. Beside her sat her new boyfriend, or had heard, a tall man in an expensive suit with the kind of haircut that required a premium salon. He was handsome in an intimidating way, the kind of man who'd never had to work for anything in his life. He whispered something to Jennifer and she smiled. Actually smiled. The gesture made blood boil. On Jennifer's other side was her attorney, a woman who looked like she'd stepped directly out of a legal thriller. Sharp features, crimson heels that clicked against the floor like a countdown timer, and eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. Her name was Rachel, and according to Tom, she had a 78% success rate in custody cases, which meant she rarely lost. "That's not encouraging," had muttered when Tom told him her record. Now, facing her across the courtroom, understood why she had such a high success rate. She radiated predatory competence. Tom guided to their table, where 3 thick folders of documentation were already arranged. Sat down, trying to position himself with the same quiet confidence he saw in Jennifer and her attorney, but he felt like in a courtroom that seemed designed to humble him. Judge Williams entered through a side door at precisely 9:00 a.m. She was a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled back severely, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. When she sat down, the entire room seemed to shift into higher alert. This woman commanded authority effortlessly. She didn't have to demand respect. It was implicit in her presence. "We are here today regarding the modification of custody agreement in the matter of James Henderson versus Jennifer Henderson, regarding the minor child, Emma Henderson," the judge intoned, her voice crisp and formal. "I understand both parties wish to present their arguments. Ms., you may proceed for the petitioner." Rachel rose with the grace of a woman completely comfortable in her element. She began with a narrative arc carefully designed to paint as a disinterested, career-focused man who had never wanted fatherhood responsibilities. Her opening statement was almost poetic in its carefully crafted destruction. "Your Honor," she began, her voice smooth as honey, "this case is about a child caught in the middle of a father's conflicting priorities. Mr. Henderson works 50 to 60 hours per week in construction management. He has minimal time for, relying instead on centers and, we will establish, occasional babysitters to fill the gap created by his absence." She paused for effect, letting her words settle into the courtroom air. "The evidence will show that Mr. Henderson has, on multiple occasions, expressed frustration with the demands of single parenthood. He has prioritized his career advancement over his daughter's emotional needs. In contrast, my client, Jennifer Henderson, has reorganized her entire life to prioritize motherhood. She has a stable living situation, a supportive partner, and most importantly, the time and emotional availability that Emma desperately needs." Felt Tom's hand touch his arm, a silent warning to stay calm, but inside was screaming. None of it was true. His work schedule had always been about providing for Emma, not abandoning her. He'd never expressed frustration about being her father, quite the opposite. Then Jennifer's attorney called the first witness, who had been Jennifer's friend from college. Took the stand and swore to tell the truth, her nervous energy radiating across the courtroom. Under Rachel's skilled questioning, she that had complained to Jennifer about the difficulties of raising Emma, that he'd said it was exhausting, and that he sometimes felt trapped by parental responsibilities. "He actually said those words," Rachel prompted gently. "Yes, I specifically remember Jennifer crying about it," her voice wavering. She was very concerned about how her husband, ex-husband, felt about their daughter. It was a lie wrapped in selective truth. Yes, had probably said that parenting was exhausting at some point. What parent hasn't? But the context was completely distorted. He'd never felt trapped by Emma. He'd been overwhelmed sometimes, sure, but never regretful. Tom cross-examined, asking pointed questions about the timeline and context, but the damage was already done. The narrative had been established. Henderson was a man who resented his parental responsibilities. Two more witnesses followed, both friends of Jennifer's, both painting similar pictures of an emotionally distant father and a devoted mother fighting for her child. One witness, a woman named Susan, even that she'd seen yawning during bedtime with Emma, suggesting he wasn't fully engaged with his daughter, gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He wanted to scream. He wanted to explain that he'd been yawning because he'd been working 14-hour days. He wanted to describe every story he'd read, every nightmare he'd soothed away, every moment of his heart breaking with love for Emma. But Tom kept his hand on his arm, a steady reminder to stay silent. Judge Williams observed everything, barely contained anger, Jennifer's composed demeanor, the attorney's precise presentations. Her expression remained unreadable, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. Then came the most brutal blow. Rachel presented a video recording, apparently from a camera, of dropping Emma off, looking harried and rushing her through the goodbye. The clip was only 30 seconds long, but it was devastating. Looked impatient. Emma looked distressed. "This footage was recorded last month," Rachel explained to the judge. "It demonstrates Mr. Henderson's rushed, emotionally disconnected approach to responsibilities. This is the reality of little Emma's daily experience with her father." Felt his world crumbling. That video didn't capture context. Emma had been upset that day because her friend wasn't at yet. He'd spent an extra 5 minutes comforting her. They'd hugged, but none of that was visible in the 30-second clip that made him look like a monster. By lunchtime recess, felt utterly defeated. Tom tried to reassure him that they'd present their side this afternoon, but could read the concern in his attorney's eyes. The morning had gone poorly, very poorly. Judge Williams, watching from the bench, had been absorbing every detail of Jennifer's carefully constructed narrative. As the morning concluded and she prepared for the afternoon proceedings, she was already formulating questions. Nothing about this case seemed straightforward. There was something missing, something she couldn't quite grasp about the truth beneath the legal arguments. As she returned to her chambers, an idea began to form. An unconventional idea, but Judge Williams had learned long ago that conventional approaches didn't always reveal the deepest truths. She would need a police dog and a 3-year-old's honest voice. The afternoon session began with feeling like a condemned man walking toward his own execution. Tom had tried to rally him during lunch, presenting the afternoon strategy with forced optimism, but couldn't shake the sinking dread in his chest. He'd seen the judge's expression during the morning testimony. She hadn't looked sympathetic. She'd looked clinical, analytical, like she was already calculating custody arrangements in her mind. Jennifer and Rachel returned from lunch looking refreshed and confident. Jennifer had even reapplied her makeup, her lipstick a perfect shade of burgundy. She caught his eye for just a moment, and he saw something flash across her face, not triumph exactly, but satisfaction. She believed she was winning. She probably was. Judge Williams took her seat at 1:45 p.m. and the bailiff called the court back to order. Tom stood to present's defense, and for the next 3 hours, they called their own witnesses. Emma's teacher that was an exceptionally engaged parent, that Emma talked about her father constantly and displayed secure attachment behaviors. Her pediatrician confirmed that Emma was healthy, developmentally on track, and showed no signs of emotional neglect. Supervisor that he was reliable and had never missed important family obligations. But even as these witnesses spoke truth, could feel the momentum from the morning still working against him. It was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with his bare hands. Finally, Tom sat down, and Rachel stood for her closing argument. She wove the morning's testimony into a compelling narrative about a father too consumed with his career to properly parent his daughter. She spoke eloquently about Emma's needs, about a child caught between two worlds, about a mother's sacrifice and a father's absence. Emma deserves stability, Rachel concluded, her voice infused with manufactured emotion. She deserves a parent who has chosen her as their primary priority. Mr. Henderson's career has always come first. That is not conjecture. That is established fact through the testimony we've heard today. Then it was Tom's turn for closing arguments. He spoke about his character, about the footage being taken out of context, about the character witnesses being friends with Jennifer and therefore inherently biased. He argued that had been the primary caregiver since Emma's birth, that she was thriving, that disrupting that bond would cause irreparable psychological damage. But as Tom spoke, Judge Williams' expression remained unreadable. She stared ahead, her hands folded on the bench, her sharp eyes showing nothing of her internal deliberations. When the closing arguments concluded, Judge Williams didn't immediately render a decision. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, and a long, tense silence filled the courtroom. "Before I make my ruling," Judge Williams announced, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade, "I need to speak with the child directly." The courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. "Ms. Henderson," the judge continued, addressing Jennifer, "I understand that Emma is present in the courthouse today with a guardian ad." "Yes, Your Honor," the court-appointed guardian, a woman named Ms. Brooks, stood up. "She's in the waiting area." Judge Williams nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I will not be conducting this interview in the courtroom," she announced. "A formal courtroom setting would be inappropriate and potentially traumatic for a 3-year-old child. Instead, I will speak with her in my chambers. However," she paused, and everyone in the courtroom leaned forward, "I want to request the assistance of the court therapy dog program." Rachel actually looked surprised, a rare crack in her composed facade. "Officer," Judge Williams continued, "I believe you coordinate the dog therapy program for our district court system. Is that correct?" A man sitting in the back of the courtroom stood up immediately. He was in his 50s, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to bringing calm to chaotic situations. "Yes, Your Honor, we have several trained therapy dogs available. I would like you to bring one of the dogs to my chambers during the child interview," Judge Williams said. Her tone brooked no argument. "A child may feel more comfortable expressing herself in the presence of an animal. I want Emma to feel safe and supported, not interrogated." Rachel stood, attempting to object. "Your Honor, I'm not sure that's—" "My decision is not subject to debate," Judge Williams interrupted coolly. "The interview will take place at 3:00 p.m. Officer, please ensure you have a gentle, well-trained dog available. Ms. Brooks, prepare the child. We will reconvene here in 30 minutes. With that, she struck her gavel once, decisively, and stood to leave the bench. The courtroom erupted into whispered conversations the moment she departed. Tom leaned over to, "I've never seen that before," he admitted. "She's going off the record, off protocol. This is unconventional. Judge Williams must sense something." Didn't respond. He couldn't. He was thinking about Emma, his 3-year-old daughter, brought into this courthouse nightmare to be interviewed by a judge she'd never met. His heart was breaking at the thought of her fear. By 2:15 p.m., Ms. Brooks brought Emma into the courtroom's waiting area where it had been packing frantically. His daughter looked impossibly small in her pink dress with the butterfly pattern, the one she'd insisted on wearing this morning, saying it was her lucky dress. Her hair was neatly braided, her little white socks pulled up carefully. The moment Emma saw her father, she ran to him with the complete, trusting abandon of a small child, scooped her up, holding her tightly against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry-scented shampoo. "Daddy," she cried, wrapping her arms around his neck, "I don't like this place, it's scary." Felt tears threatening to spill over. "I know, baby girl, I know, but you have to talk to the judge lady for just a little bit, okay? And there's going to be a doggy there. Do you like dogs?" Emma pulled back slightly, her eyes widening. "A doggy?" "A really nice doggy," confirmed, wiping a tear from his own cheek. "His name is Rex, and he's going to be right there with you." "Will you be there?" Emma asked, her small voice trembling. His heart shattered. "I can't be in there, sweetheart, but Rex will keep you safe, and Ms. Brooks will be there, and you just have to tell the truth about where you like to be and who you like to spend time with. Okay." Emma nodded solemnly, but her lower lip trembled. Held her for another long moment, trying to communicate through the embrace everything he couldn't say aloud. His love, his devotion, his desperate hope that somehow his daughter would find the words to save them both. At 2:55 p.m., officer appeared in the waiting area leading Rex. The German Shepherd was enormous, easily twice Emma's height if standing on hind legs, but his eyes were kind and gentle. When Rex saw Emma, his entire demeanor shifted into therapy mode. He walked slowly toward her, his posture deliberately non-threatening. Emma's fear evaporated instantly. She stood up, staring at the massive dog in wonder. "Can I pet him?" she whispered. "Of course," officer smiled warmly. "Rex loves being petted, go ahead." Emma approached carefully, her small hand reaching out to touch Rex's soft fur. The dog lowered his head, allowing her to pet him thoroughly. Within seconds, Emma was smiling, her earlier anxiety melting away. Watched this transformation with something approaching hope. Maybe, just maybe, this dog could help Emma speak truths that would otherwise remain locked inside her frightened little heart. "Come on, Emma," Ms. Brooks said gently. "Let's go talk to the judge. Rex will come with you, okay?" Emma took Rex's collar, her courage bolstered by the dog's solid presence. Officer guided them toward Judge Williams' chambers. As they disappeared around the corner, whispered a prayer to a God he'd almost stopped believing in. In 30 minutes, his entire future would be determined by what his 3-year-old daughter said to a judge and a dog. Everything depended on Emma's voice now. Judge Williams' chambers were nothing like the cold formality of the courtroom. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced in the warm afternoon light. The judge had deliberately arranged the space to be welcoming for a small child. The harsh fluorescent lights had been turned off in favor of soft table lamps. Instead of the judge's formal desk dominating the room, she sat on a comfortable chair beside a plush area rug decorated with soft patterns of clouds and stars. Emma entered slowly, her small hand still gripping Rex's collar. Officer walked beside her, his presence calm and reassuring. Ms. Brooks, the court-appointed guardian, sat in an adjacent chair with a notebook, ready to observe and document. Judge Williams stood as they entered, and Emma immediately noticed that the imposing judge from the courtroom had transformed into someone almost kind. The judge's stern expression had softened considerably. She wore reading glasses now, making her look less intimidating and more like someone's grandmother. "Hello, Emma," Judge Williams said warmly. "Thank you so much for coming to visit me. I'm Judge Williams, but you can just call me the Judge Lady if you want. That's perfectly fine." Emma didn't respond verbally, but she did nod slightly, her fingers still buried in Rex's fur. "Why don't we sit down together?" Judge Williams suggested, gesturing to the plush carpet. "Rex can sit with us too. He loves sitting on soft carpets, don't you, Rex?" As if on cue, Officer gently guided Rex to the carpet, and the dog settled down with a contented sigh, his massive head resting directly on Emma's small lap. The child's shoulders visibly relaxed at the weight and warmth of the dog against her. Judge Williams settled into a chair positioned at eye level with Emma, never above her, always equal. This was deliberate. She had learned decades ago that children responded better when they weren't literally looking up at authority figures. "I wanted to talk with you today because I need to understand something very important," Judge Williams began, her voice soft and genuine. "I'm trying to learn about your family, and you know your family better than anybody else in the whole world. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer honestly. There are no wrong answers, okay? You just tell me what's true in your heart." Emma's eyes were still fixed on Rex, but she nodded. "Let's start with something easy," Judge Williams continued. "What do you like to do with your daddy?" For a long moment there was silence. Emma petted Rex slowly, her fingers trembling slightly as she stroked his silky fur. Officer watched carefully, ready to intervene if the child became too distressed. But then, as if the dog had unlocked something deep within her, words began flowing out. "Daddy makes pancakes," Emma said quietly. "Not normal pancakes. He makes them like animals. Like, he makes them into a puppy face with the berries for eyes. And yesterday he made one like a butterfly and the syrup was like the butterfly's drink." Judge Williams' expression remained calm, but her eyes grew warmer. "That sounds fun. What else do you do with your daddy?" "We read stories," Emma continued, gaining confidence as she spoke. "And Daddy does funny voices. Like when we read about the bear, Daddy goes R-O-O-R-R. She demonstrated in a tiny voice that was utterly adorable. "And when we read about the mouse, he goes squeaky squeaky. And I laugh so hard my belly hurts." The judge smiled. "Your daddy sounds very creative. What about when you're sad or scared? What does your daddy do?" Emma's voice became quieter, more vulnerable. "Daddy holds me. He picks me up and rocks me and sings songs. He sings really bad and it makes me feel better because it's so funny how bad he sings. But also because he's holding me and I feel safe." Judge Williams leaned forward slightly. "That's very important, Emma. Feeling safe is one of the most important things. Do you feel safe with your daddy?" "Yes," Emma said firmly, almost fiercely. She looked up from Rex for the first time, making direct eye contact with the judge. "I feel very safe with Daddy. He never yells at me. He helps me when I'm scared. He listens to me even when I'm talking about boring stuff about my toys." "What about your mommy?" Judge Williams asked gently. "Tell me about time you spend with your mommy." Emma's expression changed. Her jaw tightened slightly and her hand stilled on Rex's fur. The dog seemed to sense the shift in emotion, and he pressed his head more firmly against her lap, as if offering comfort. Mommy is nice sometimes," Emma said slowly, choosing her words carefully in that way small children do when they're being truthful. "But Mommy is different now. She gets mad sometimes." "Mad about what?" Judge Williams asked, her voice remaining gentle. "Mad about Daddy," Emma whispered. "She says mean things about him. She says he doesn't love me the right way. She says he tells me lies." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But Daddy doesn't tell lies. Daddy always tells me the truth. When I ask him hard questions, he tries to answer them. He doesn't make stuff up." Judge Williams handed a tissue box closer to Emma, but the judge didn't interrupt. She simply listened, letting Emma speak at her own pace. And Emma's voice broke slightly. "And Mommy said something else. She said we're moving far, far away, like really far, and Daddy can't come with us." Officer's jaw tightened. He exchanged a quick glance with Judge Williams, but both remained silent, allowing Emma to continue. "I don't want to move," Emma said, tears now streaming down her small cheeks. She buried her face in Rex's fur, and the dog angled his head to nuzzle her gently. "I don't want to leave Daddy. Daddy is my best friend in the whole world, and my heart hurts when I think about not seeing him every day." Judge Williams felt her own eyes becoming watery, but she maintained her composure. She reached over and gently patted Emma's shoulder. "It's okay to feel sad about that, Emma. It's okay to cry." "Rex," Emma whispered to the dog, as if sharing a secret with her four-legged confidant, "I really, really don't want to leave Daddy. I want to stay with him. He's the best daddy in the whole entire world." The room fell into a profound silence. Only the sound of Emma's quiet crying and the gentle rustling of tissue paper filled the space. Judge Williams sat back, processing what she'd heard. This was not a coached response. This was not a child who'd been primed with prepared statements. This was the raw, unfiltered emotional truth of a 3-year-old expressing her deepest needs and fears. "Emma," Judge Williams said after a respectful pause, "I want to thank you for being so honest with me. You're a very brave girl, and you've helped me understand something very important." Emma looked up, her face blotchy from crying, her eyes red and swollen. Did I say the right things?" she asked uncertainly. Judge Williams felt her heart break a little. "You said exactly the right things, Emma. You told me the truth, and the truth is always the most important thing." Officer checked his watch. They'd been in chambers for 37 minutes. It had felt simultaneously like 5 minutes and 5 hours. He could see that Emma was emotionally exhausted, tapped out from the intensity of sharing such vulnerable feelings. "I think that's probably enough for today," Officer said gently, rising slightly. "Emma, would you like to get some juice and cookies? I think the judge's assistant might have some out front." Emma nodded, but before she stood, she wrapped her arms around Rex's neck in a tight hug. "Thank you, Rex," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me be brave." As they prepared to leave, Judge Williams stood and guided Emma to the door. She knelt down to eye level with the small girl. "Emma, what you did today was very important. You helped me understand what matters most to you, and I promise you, I'm going to make sure that matters very much to my decision." Emma nodded, though she didn't fully understand what the judge was saying. All she knew was that she'd told the truth about her daddy, and somehow that felt like enough. As the door closed behind them, Judge Williams returned to her chair and sat in silence for a long moment. She removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. In her 23 years on the bench, she had rarely heard anything as compelling as that 3-year-old's honest voice speaking about her father. The case was no longer complicated. Judge Williams sat alone in her chambers after Emma had left, her pen poised above her legal pad, her mind churning through everything she'd heard. The transcription notes lay before her, documenting every word the 3-year-old had spoken. But the written words somehow failed to capture the raw emotional truth that had filled the room. Outside her chambers, Emma was drinking apple juice in the court clerk's office, her small face still marked by dried tears. Officer sat nearby, periodically glancing at the child with an expression of deep concern. Ms. Brooks, the court-appointed guardian, was making her own notes, her expression grave. What had transpired in those 37 minutes had shaken all of them in ways they hadn't anticipated. Judge Williams replayed the conversation mentally. The way Emma had spoken about her father with such genuine affection, such authentic attachment. No child could fake that level of emotional connection. It wasn't possible to rehearse or coach that kind of truthfulness. Emma's descriptions of parenting, the pancake animals, the silly voices, the safety and comfort, these were the details of genuine lived experience. But it was the second part of the interview that had truly alarmed Judge Williams. After Emma had opened up about her relationship with her father, Judge Williams had gently asked about her mother. The change in Emma's demeanor had been immediate and telling. The little girl's voice had become quieter, more guarded. She'd actually looked toward the door, as if checking whether her mother was listening. "Does your mommy spend a lot of time with you?" Judge Williams had asked carefully. "Sometimes," Emma had replied hesitantly, "but mommy is usually on her phone or talking with her boyfriend." "Do you like spending time with her?" Emma had struggled with that question, her small face showing the effort of trying to navigate something complicated for a 3-year-old's developing mind. "I like my mommy, but she says things that make me sad." "What kinds of things?" Judge Williams had asked, keeping her voice entirely neutral despite her growing alarm. "She says that Daddy is bad," Emma had whispered. "She says he doesn't really love me. She says he only pretends to love me because the judge said he has to." Judge Williams had felt her breath catch. This was coached language the judge said he has to. These were not words a 3-year-old naturally invented. These were words placed in her mouth. "Has your mommy told you these things?" Judge Williams had continued. Emma had nodded, tears beginning to form again. "She said that when we move far away, Daddy won't even try to find us. She said he'll forget about me because I'm not as important as his work. Officer had shifted in his seat, his jaw clenching visibly. How did that make you feel? Judge Williams had asked. Really sad, Emma had said, her voice breaking. Because I don't believe her. I know Daddy loves me. I feel it in my heart, and I don't want him to forget me. I don't want to move away. That's when Emma had turned to Rex, as if the dog was her truest confidant, and spoken the words that would echo through the rest of this case. You know what, Rex? Mommy said I shouldn't love Daddy so much, but I do love him, and I'm scared. I'm scared about moving. I'm scared that if we move, Daddy will be sad and alone, and I don't want that. I want to stay with Daddy. The vulnerability in that 3-year-old's voice had been heartbreaking. This wasn't a child who'd been coached to say anything specific. This was a child expressing her genuine terror at being separated from her primary attachment figure, the person she clearly loved most. Judge Williams had continued for several more minutes, allowing Emma to express her feelings without pressure or leading questions. The judge had learned long ago that the best testimony came from simply creating space for people to tell their truth. What emerged was a picture of manipulation, of a mother who was using her daughter as a weapon in her custody battle, of a child caught in the middle, confused about whether her deepest feelings were her own or implanted by the adults around her. Now, sitting alone in her chambers, Judge Williams made a decision that would reshape this entire case. She pressed the intercom button on her desk. Can you ask the bailiff to have everyone reconvene in the courtroom in 15 minutes, and please have officer meet me in my office beforehand? 15 minutes later, officer sat across from Judge Williams, his weathered face grave. What you witnessed in that interview, Judge Williams said without preamble, was a child being emotionally manipulated by her mother. That little girl loves her father with the kind of primal attachment that cannot be faked or manufactured, and I believe she's being subjected to parental alienation. Officer nodded slowly. I've seen it before, he said quietly. The way she looked toward the door when asked about her mother, the rehearsed language about the judge. Children absorb the messaging they receive from their primary caregivers. Emma is terrified of being separated from her father, and her mother is using that fear as a weapon. Exactly, Judge Williams said, and I'm not going to allow that to continue unchallenged. I'm going to do something unprecedented in my courtroom today. I'm going to have Emma testify in front of both parents, with you and Rex present. Not as a formal court testimony, but as an opportunity for this child to speak her truth in front of all the parties involved. Officer looked concerned. Your Honor, that could be traumatic for the child, seeing her mother. I'm aware of the risks, Judge Williams interrupted, but I'm more concerned about the long-term trauma of a child being separated from her primary attachment figure and subjected to systematic alienation. Emma needs to speak her truth, and her mother needs to hear it directly from her daughter's mouth, not filtered through lawyers or cross-examination. Raw, real, honest. As they prepared to return to the courtroom, Judge Williams felt the weight of her decision. This was unconventional. This might be appealed, but sometimes justice required stepping outside conventional boundaries. In the courtroom waiting area was packing frantically. Tom kept trying to reassure him, but the attorney looked uncertain himself. The judge spent nearly 40 minutes with Emma, Tom said. That's either very good or very bad. There's no way to know. Then the bailiff appeared. All parties to reconvene in the courtroom immediately. Judge Williams is ready to continue. As walked back into the courtroom, his heart was pounding so hard he thought it might explode. Jennifer looked smug and confident. Her attorney was reviewing notes, clearly preparing closing arguments for what she expected to be her victory. Judge Williams entered and everyone stood, but instead of returning to her bench, she remained standing, her expression unreadable. I have completed my interview with the minor child, Judge Williams announced, and I have determined that further testimony is necessary. I want to hear from Emma directly in this courtroom, in the presence of both parents, regarding her preferences and her emotional state." Rachel stood immediately, objecting strenuously. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular, subjecting a 3-year-old to—" "My decision is not subject to debate," Judge Williams said coldly. "Officer, please bring the child." As Officer left to retrieve Emma, and Rex felt something shift inside him. His daughter was about to speak, and somehow he knew this moment was going to change everything. Jennifer's smug expression had faded. She looked nervous now, very nervous. The courtroom doors opened. An officer entered with Emma walking beside Rex, her small hand gripping the dog's collar. She looked frightened but determined. Judge Williams looked down at the little girl with infinite compassion. "Emma," she said gently, "I want you to look at your daddy and your mommy, and I want you to tell everyone in this room what you told me in my office. Can you do that?" Emma looked directly at, and his heart nearly stopped. Then she opened her mouth to speak. The courtroom fell into a profound silence as Emma stood beside Rex, her small frame dwarfed by the enormous dog and the intimidating architecture of the room. Her pink butterfly dress seemed impossibly delicate against the courtroom's heavy wooden furnishings. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. Felt tears threatening to spill over as he watched his daughter gather her courage. She was 3 years old, and yet she was about to testify in a custody battle that would determine their future together. The unfairness of it was almost unbearable. Judge Williams approached slowly, making sure her imposing figure didn't seem threatening. "Emma," the judge said softly, "you remember what you told me in my office. I want you to tell everyone here, your mommy, your daddy, and all these people, about your daddy and the pancakes. Can you do that?" Emma looked at her father for a long moment, saw her gathering strength from his presence. He mouthed silently, "You can do this, baby girl." Then Emma began to speak, her small voice filling the courtroom. "Daddy makes pancakes," she said, her 3-year-old voice remarkably clear despite her obvious nervousness. "Not like regular pancakes. Daddy makes them into shapes, like puppy faces and butterfly shapes and dinosaurs. And he puts the berries on like eyes, and it makes me laugh." Rachel shifted in her seat, her confident expression beginning to crack. "Yesterday," Emma continued, gaining confidence as she spoke, "Daddy made me a pancake that looked like a princess, like a real princess. And Daddy said I was his real princess, and I was so happy." Felt his chest tighten. He remembered that morning, Emma had been upset before breakfast, but the princess pancake had transformed her entire mood. "And Daddy reads me stories," Emma continued. "And he does funny voices, really, really funny voices, like for the big bear he goes." Emma demonstrated with surprising volume for such a small child, "ROOARR," and for the little mouse he goes squeaky squeaky, and I laugh and laugh until my belly hurts. A few people in the courtroom smiled despite the gravity of the situation, but Judge Williams remained focused, watching Emma with complete attention. "What about when you're scared, Emma?" the judge prompted gently. "What does your daddy do when you have a nightmare?" Emma's expression became more serious. "When I have scary dreams, I go to Daddy and he picks me up and rocks me, and he sings songs to me. He sings really, really bad." Emma's voice grew tender. "But it doesn't matter that he sings bad because I feel safe when he's holding me. My heart stops being scared." Covered his mouth with his hand, unable to contain his emotion. This was their life together. These were the moments that mattered. Judge Williams nodded encouragingly. "Emma, I want to ask you something else. I want you to look at your mommy, okay?" Emma turned to look at her mother. Jennifer's face had gone pale. She gripped the edge of the table as if it was the only thing holding her upright. "Has your mommy told you things about your daddy?" Judge Williams asked carefully. Emma nodded slowly, her eyes not leaving her mother's face. "What did she say?" Emma's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Mommy said that Daddy is bad. Mommy said Daddy doesn't really love me. She said he just pretends because. Emma struggled with the complex phrasing because the judge made him. Rachel stood up abruptly. Your Honor, I must object to the line of questioning. The child is being prompted to make accusations. Sit down, Judge Williams said, her voice like ice. This child is speaking her truth. You will not interrupt again. Rachel sat down, her face flushed with anger and something else. Fear, perhaps. The fear that her carefully constructed case was crumbling in real time. Emma continued, as if the interruption hadn't happened. Her focus remained entirely on Judge Williams. Mommy said when we move far away, Daddy won't even look for us. Mommy said Daddy will forget about me because his work is more important than me. Emma's eyes filled with tears. But I don't believe her, because Daddy is never too busy for me. Daddy always has time for me. Judge Williams handed Emma a tissue, and the child wiped her eyes with surprising maturity. I love my daddy, Emma said, her voice becoming stronger, more certain. I love him so much, and I don't want to move away from him. I don't want to be away from him at all. My heart doesn't want that. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the court reporters' typing had ceased. Emma, Judge Williams said, if you could decide where you wanted to live and who you wanted to live with, what would you choose? Emma didn't hesitate. She looked directly at her small face full of certainty. I want to live with my daddy, she said firmly. I want to be with my daddy all the time, because he makes me feel safe and happy, and I love him more than anything in the whole world. Felt a sob escape from his chest. He tried to suppress it, but the emotional dam had broken. Tears streamed down his face as he watched his daughter speak from her heart. Jennifer stood up suddenly, her chair scraping backward. Emma, sweetheart, that's not. Sit down, Judge Williams commanded, not even looking at Jennifer. Her attention remained entirely on Emma. Jennifer sat down, her face contorted with conflicting emotions. Anger, desperation, realization that her plan had catastrophically backfired. Judge Williams turned back to Emma. Thank you for being so brave, Emma, and thank you for telling me the truth. Can you sit over here beside Rex while the grown-ups talk? Emma walked over to Officer, who guided her to a chair positioned away from the litigants. Rex immediately settled beside her, his massive head resting across her lap, his presence providing comfort. Judge Williams returned to her bench and sat down slowly. She looked around the courtroom, at whose face was wet with tears, at Jennifer, whose carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled, at Rachel, whose legal strategy lay in ruins. What I have witnessed today, Judge Williams began, her voice carrying absolute authority, is testimony that I will not soon forget. A 3-year-old child cannot dissemble. She cannot perform. She cannot be coached into expressing emotions she doesn't genuinely feel. What Emma has told this court today is the unfiltered truth of a child's heart. The judge removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. I have been a judge for 23 years. I have presided over hundreds of custody cases, and I have never heard more compelling testimony than what I have just heard. She replaced her glasses and looked directly at Jennifer. Ms. Henderson, it is clear to this court that the child in this matter has a profound attachment to her father, the primary caregiver since her infancy. It is equally clear that she has been subjected to attempted parental alienation through statements designed to undermine her confidence in her father's love and care. Jennifer's attorney stood to make an objection, but Judge Williams cut her off with a look so cold it could freeze boiling water. I am not finished, the judge said. What I have heard today constitutes clear evidence of emotional manipulation of a minor. The child's own words demonstrate her genuine preference for remaining with her father, her security in his love, and her distress at the prospect of separation from him. Judge Williams leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. Furthermore, she continued, I want to put on the record that Officer and Rex facilitated this child's ability to speak her truth in a way that conventional courtroom procedures could never have achieved. A 3-year-old child was able to access her authentic emotions and express them without fear or pressure, because she had the emotional support of a trained therapy animal. She looked directly at Officer and nodded with respect. I am now prepared to render my full custody ruling, but I want everyone in this courtroom to understand what has transpired here today. We have just witnessed a child speak truth to power. We have witnessed the limitations of legal argument and attorney strategy when confronted with the simple, honest voice of a child. Judge Williams' gaze swept across the courtroom, landing finally on Emma. That, she said quietly, is justice in its form. The courtroom remained suspended in absolute silence as Judge Williams shuffled papers on her desk, preparing to deliver the ruling that would reshape all 3 lives in this case. The air felt thick with anticipation and emotion. Sat rigidly at his table, afraid to breathe, afraid to hope, afraid that any movement might shatter the fragile reality he thought he'd witnessed. Emma sat quietly beside Rex, the dog's presence keeping her anchored as she watched the adults navigate the machinery of justice. She didn't fully understand what was happening, only that something very important was occurring. Jennifer stared straight ahead, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion, though her hands betrayed her by trembling visibly. Rachel was reviewing case law on her laptop, her expression hard, calculating. She was already thinking about appeals, about grounds for overturning this ruling, but even she seemed to sense that something irreversible had just occurred. Judge Williams removed her reading glasses and looked directly at the courtroom. I have reviewed all evidence presented in this case, she began, her voice measured and authoritative. I have considered the testimony of the character witnesses presented by both parties. I have reviewed the employment records, documentation, and medical records of the minor child. And most importantly, I have interviewed the child herself and observed her emotional responses to questions about her family situation. She paused, allowing the weight of her next words to settle. The evidence is overwhelming, Judge Williams continued. The minor child, Emma Henderson, has demonstrated a secure and healthy attachment to her father, James Henderson. She displays the emotional vocabulary and behavioral markers of a child who has been consistently cared for, emotionally nurtured, and provided with stability and love. Felt tears beginning to form again, but this time they were tears of hope. The evidence further demonstrates, the judge proceeded, that the minor child's mother has engaged in parental alienation, a form of emotional manipulation designed to undermine the child's confidence in her father's love and reliability. The child's own testimony established that she has been subjected to statements suggesting her father does not genuinely love her, that separation from him is imminent, and that her father prioritizes work over her. Judge Williams' expression hardened as she spoke about Jennifer's actions. I find these allegations, the suggestions of parental alienation, to be substantively proven by the child's own words. A 3-year-old cannot manufacture emotional language. She cannot perform authentic attachment behaviors. What I observed in this courtroom today was a child defending her relationship with her father against an adult's attempt to sever it. Jennifer's attorney stood to object, but Judge Williams cut her off with a single gesture. I will now render my decision, the judge announced. The courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. It is hereby ordered that primary legal and physical custody of the minor child, Emma Henderson, is awarded to James Henderson, Judge Williams declared, her words echoing through the courtroom like a gavel strike to the soul. Felt the world tilt beneath him. It was happening. It was actually happening. He was going to keep his daughter. Jennifer Henderson, the judge continued, addressing Emma's mother directly, is awarded supervised visitation with the minor child, consisting of 4 hours per week on scheduled days, supervised by a court-appointed visitation monitor. This arrangement will continue for a minimum of 6 months, at which point a reassessment will occur based on demonstrated progress in therapeutic intervention. Jennifer's face crumpled, but she maintained her composure. Her attorney immediately began whispering to her, no doubt explaining the appeal process and legal grounds for reconsideration. Judge Williams continued, her voice remaining steady and formal. The reasoning for this decision is as follows. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Henderson has been the primary caregiver for the minor child since her birth. The child displays secure attachment to her father and exhibits signs of distress at the prospect of separation from him. The evidence further suggests that the maternal parent has attempted to undermine the child's relationship with her father through statements and suggestions designed to create doubt and fear. She looked directly at Jennifer. Ms. Henderson, I will be ordering you to participate in family counseling as a condition of increased visitation. The goal of these sessions will be to help you understand the damage that parental alienation causes to children and to rebuild a healthy co-parenting relationship for Emma's benefit. Judge Williams then turned to address the room more broadly. I want to speak to something that happened in this courtroom today that I believe deserves special recognition and commendation, the judge announced. Officer and Rex, the trained therapy dog, facilitated this child's ability to access and express her authentic emotional truth in a way that traditional courtroom procedures could not achieve. Officer straightened in his seat, his expression showing surprise and respect. In my 23 years on the bench, Judge Williams said, I have never witnessed a more effective tool for truth-telling than the presence of a trained therapy dog. This animal created a safe emotional space where a vulnerable child could express her deepest feelings without fear of legal consequences or adult manipulation. The judge looked directly at Officer. Officer, your therapy dog program has proven its value not just in supporting children, but in serving the interests of justice itself. I am recommending that the district court system expand this program immediately and make it available in all family law proceedings involving minor children. She paused, then added, furthermore, I am commending Rex for his service to this court and to justice. What occurred today would not have been possible without this animal's presence. Several people in the courtroom smiled at the formal recognition of the dog's contribution. Even in the midst of the grave proceedings, there was something deeply touching about a judge formally commending an animal for facilitating truth. Judge Williams addressed directly. Mr. Henderson, I want to acknowledge your dedication to your daughter. The evidence in this case demonstrates that you have been an exemplary parent. Your daughter loves you deeply, and that love is based on genuine experiences of care and support. Maintain that commitment. That is the foundation of her. Nodded, unable to speak through his emotion. Finally, Judge Williams looked at Emma. Emma, I want to thank you for being brave today. You told the truth, and the truth is the most important thing in a courtroom. You helped me understand what matters most, and because of your honesty, you and your daddy will be together. I hope you're proud of yourself because you should be. Emma smiled shyly, not entirely understanding the judge's words, but recognizing the warmth and approval in her voice. This court is adjourned, Judge Williams announced, striking her gavel once decisively. The moment the gavel fell, stood up. For just a moment he couldn't move. Then he walked around his table and Emma ran directly to him. He scooped her up, holding her tightly against his chest, his entire body shaking with relief and overwhelming emotion. Daddy won, Emma squealed, not understanding the legal terminology but somehow intuiting that something important had been decided in their favor. Yes, baby girl, whispered into her hair. Daddy won, we get to stay together. Around the courtroom, people were gathering their papers and preparing to leave. Several looked at with expressions of sympathy or approval. Others looked at Jennifer, who was sitting rigidly, her face betraying no emotion despite the obvious devastation beneath. Rachel was already on her phone, undoubtedly reaching other attorneys, likely already strategizing appeals and legal challenges. But Judge Williams, watching from her bench before returning to her chambers, saw something else. She saw a father and daughter reunited. She saw an unexpected victory for truth over manipulation. She saw proof that sometimes justice required stepping outside conventional boundaries. She had done her job. She had protected a child from a dangerous family dynamic. She had used every tool available to her, including a 100-pound German Shepherd, to serve the interests of justice. Officer approached and Emma as they stood in the courtroom, their arms wrapped around each other. "Congratulations," Officer said warmly, extending his hand too. "Your daughter is something special." "She really is," agreed, shaking the officer's hand firmly. Then he knelt down, bringing Emma to eye level with Rex. "Emma, I want you to say thank you to Rex. He helped you be very brave today." Emma wrapped her arms around Rex's neck, burying her face in his fur. "Thank you, Rex," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me be brave and help Daddy win." Officer felt tears in his own eyes. This was why he did this work. This was the point of therapy dogs in courtrooms, not just to comfort children but to facilitate justice itself. As carried Emma out of the courtroom, his daughter chattering happily about going home, the weight of the morning lifted completely from his shoulders. They had survived the storm. They had found their way through the darkness. And they were going to be okay. 6 months later, Henderson stood on the balcony of his new apartment on a Saturday morning in late September, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The apartment was larger than his previous one, a small 2-bedroom with actual space for Emma to have her own room decorated with butterfly wallpaper and a bookshelf overflowing with stories. Inside, Emma was still asleep, sprawled across her bed in an impossible position, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. She'd grown so much in 6 months. She was taller, more confident, her speech more articulate. The therapist had said she was adjusting beautifully to the custody decision, showing no signs of the emotional trauma that often accompanied custody battles. Smiled at the memory of her 4th birthday party 3 weeks ago. She'd insisted on inviting Rex. An officer had brought the therapy dog to the celebration. Emma had been the happiest he'd ever seen her, playing with other children with a confidence and joy that had been missing during the custody battle. The transformation had been remarkable. Phone buzzed with a text from his brother David. "Big day today. You ready?" Today was the grand opening of Rex's Voice. The nonprofit organization had established to provide therapy dogs in family court proceedings. He'd spent the last 6 months developing partnerships with local law enforcement, training additional therapy dog teams, and raising funds. What had started as a personal gratitude toward Officer and Rex had blossomed into something much larger, a movement to fundamentally change how children's voices were heard in courtrooms. Judge Williams was attending the opening ceremony, as was Officer with 3 additional therapy dog teams that had completed their training. The program had already received inquiries from family courts in neighboring districts. Had named the nonprofit Rex's Voice specifically to honor the dog who had made Emma's testimony possible. Every program banner featured Rex's photograph and a quote from Judge Williams. "Sometimes justice requires us to listen differently." At 10:30 a.m., stood in the small office space they'd secured downtown, watching as community members, lawyers, social workers, and law enforcement officers filed in for the opening ceremony. A news crew from the local television station was setting up cameras. Judge Williams arrived at 10:45 a.m., dressed in a sharp blazer, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon light. She looked around the office with visible approval. On the walls were photographs from custody cases where therapy dogs had facilitated children's testimony. Of course, Names and identifying details had been changed for confidentiality, but the impact was clear: children sitting beside dogs, their faces showing relief and comfort. "This is extraordinary," Judge Williams said too, shaking his hand warmly. "When I suggested that unconventional approach in court, I never imagined it would lead to this." "You changed everything," replied. "You showed me, you showed all of us, that sometimes justice requires thinking differently." Officer arrived with Rex and 3 other therapy dogs, all wearing special vests identifying them as court therapy animals. Rex, now 6 years old, moved with the calm dignity of a dog who understood his important role in the world. Children in the office immediately gravitated toward the dogs, and their parents watched with visible relief as their kids' anxieties seemed to dissipate in the animal's presence. "Emma's here," Officer said too, pointing toward the entrance where Emma had just arrived with a family friend. She wanted to see Rex again before the ceremony. Emma spotted the German Shepherd and ran directly to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "Rex, I missed you so much." Rex's entire body seemed to wiggle with joy at seeing the little girl who had helped change his professional trajectory. Officer watched them with a smile. "She talks about Rex all the time," Officer told. "Kids don't forget these experiences. Emma knows that Rex helped her tell the truth. She understands in her child's way that he made something important possible." The opening ceremony was brief but profound. Spoke about his journey through the custody battle, about discovering that children's voices often go unheard in legal proceedings, about how therapy dogs could facilitate authentic emotional expression. He introduced Officer and the therapy dog teams. He recognized Judge Williams' courage in breaking protocol to serve justice. Judge Williams stood to address the crowd. "What I learned in that courtroom," she said, "is that traditional legal mechanisms sometimes fail us. We rely on attorney arguments, on witness testimony filtered through adult interpretation, on evidence that can be manipulated. But children's truth, authentic, unguarded emotional truth, that is something that transcends legal strategy." She looked directly at Emma. "This program exists because a brave 3-year-old girl was willing to speak her heart. It exists because we created an environment where she felt safe enough to do so, and it will help countless children in the years to come." After the ceremony, stood with Judge Williams, Officer, and Emma, who was still holding Rex's collar possessively. "I have news," Judge Williams said. "The state legislature is considering a bill to establish therapy dog programs in all family courts statewide. They cited this program and our case as the catalyst for that legislative interest." Felt overwhelmed. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep doing this work," Judge Williams replied. "Say you'll keep advocating for children's voices to be heard authentically." Over the following weeks and months, Rex's voice expanded rapidly. More therapy dog teams were trained. More courts expressed interest. More children found the courage to speak their truth because they had 4-legged companions beside them. Jennifer's supervised visitation had progressed well. She had completed the court-ordered counseling and was genuinely working to understand the damage parental alienation causes. Her supervised visits with Emma had increased to 8 hours per week, and while the relationship would never be what it might have been, there was cautious healing occurring. 6 months into the custody decision, a full year after the court battle began, sat with Emma on their apartment balcony, watching the sunset. "Daddy," Emma said, her 4-year-old voice carrying a serious tone, "do you remember when we went to the judge's room with Rex?" "I do, baby girl," replied, running his fingers through her hair. "I remember." "I was scared," Emma said, "but Rex made me brave, and I told the judge the truth about how much I love you." Felt tears forming. "You did tell the truth, and you were very brave." "And the judge listened," Emma continued, demonstrating the remarkable memory children have for significant emotional events. "And that's why we get to live together." That's exactly right, confirmed. Emma leaned against her father, her small body fitting perfectly against his side. I'm glad I was brave. I'm glad I have you, Daddy. Held his daughter, marveling at how close he'd come to losing her. He thought about how different things might have been if Judge Williams hadn't made that unconventional decision. He thought about how a dog, a beautiful, intelligent, compassionate dog, had helped facilitate justice in a way that no attorney could have. 3 years later, Rex's voice had established therapy dog programs in 12 states. Thousands of children had been able to speak their authentic emotional truths in courtrooms because they had animal companions beside them. Judge Williams was invited to speak at national conferences about the intersection of animal-assisted therapy and family law. Officer trained therapy dog teams across the country and became the program's national director. Rex, though aging, remained the public face of the program, beloved by everyone who met him. Emma Henderson, now 7 years old, had written a children's book called Rex Helps Me Tell the Truth, illustrated with drawings of her experiences. All proceeds went to funding therapy dog programs for children in family court proceedings. And the construction manager who had nearly lost his daughter had found his calling in advocating for children's voices in the legal system. He had built something meaningful from the ashes of his custody battle, a legacy that would help countless families for generations to come. On Emma's 7th birthday, Officer brought Rex to their home for a special celebration. As Emma hugged the aging therapy dog, she whispered words only he could hear. "Thank you for helping me save my family, Rex. Thank you for helping me be brave." Rex's tail wagged slowly, his wise old eyes holding the understanding of a dog who had genuinely changed the world, one child's authentic voice at a time.